You've returned to Horror Drift Stories. If you'd like, leave a comment telling me your city or country. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Dim the lights, and let's begin. Story 1. Thick fog covered the old graveyard that night. Moss had grown over the ancient tombstones, and weeds and tall grass had taken over almost every corner of the place. The air carried the cold edge of early spring, though it was still gentle enough to be almost pleasant. High above us, the branches of tall trees stretched over a broken, rusted fence. Small buds had just started forming on the leaves, a quiet sign that winter was finally ending. I could tell Quincy was nervous. He held the rosary I had given him tightly against his chest. His breath came out in slow, heavy bursts that turned into mist in the cold night air. I had taken the rosary from my grandmother's house earlier that day. She had dozens of them scattered around the place, inside drawers, hanging from doorknobs, tucked into small bowls on tables. "I don't know about this, man," Quincy whispered. He tried to sound calm, but the fear in his voice was obvious. He pushed his glasses higher up his nose and scanned the dark graveyard carefully. His deep blue eyes moved from one shadow to the next, as if expecting something terrible to appear at any moment. "Relax," I said, leaning casually against the shovel I had brought. At the time, we were both older teenagers. I always acted like I had everything under control. Looking back now, I realize how little control anyone actually has over the world around them. Under the light of the full moon, something began to form in the distance. At first, it looked like nothing more than drifting fog, something you could easily mistake for wind moving through the graveyard. But slowly, shape began to appear inside the mist. A human outline, long hair, the soft outline of a Victorian-style dress. Then the eyes appeared. They looked alive, desperately alive. Despite the transparent nature of her body, those eyes held more emotion than most living people ever show. The tree line behind her could be seen through her body like a strange reflection in water. Her cheekbones were soft, and her eyebrows were hidden beneath a large, elegant hat that matched the long flowing dress she wore. "Holy shit," Quincy whispered. His knees shook slightly as he gripped the crucifix at the end of the rosary so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "You weren't lying," he said. "She's real. The first time I saw her, I was 13 years old. I grew up with my grandparents outside a small town, surrounded by thick forests, and not much else. My parents had died in a car accident when I was very young. I didn't learn the full truth about the crash until many years later. My mother had been drunk behind the wheel. Because of everything that happened, my grandparents gave me a lot of freedom, probably more than they should have. I spent most nights sneaking out of the house and meeting up with friends who were just as reckless as I was. My grandparents never noticed. One night, while walking home, I decided to take a shortcut through the woods. That was when I found the graveyard. It looked ancient even then. The fence was falling apart, and the stones were so worn down that many of the names had completely disappeared. And in the center of that graveyard, walking slowly between the graves, was her. At first I stayed far away, watching through the twisted branches of the trees. She moved slowly across the graveyard, sometimes stopping and covering her face with her hands. She looked like she was crying, but no tears ever fell. Night after night, I returned. Each time I moved a little closer to the broken fence. The first time she noticed me, I ran. I ran as fast as I could through the trees, but something made me stop and look back. She was standing there, staring at me. Her face looked deeply sad. The loneliness in her eyes was overwhelming. Slowly, cautiously, I walked back toward her. I had never seen anything like it. I had no idea how something that was clearly dead could have eyes that held so much emotion. "Of course she's real," I said, snapping back to the present. I bent down and grabbed the bag I had placed behind me. Something rattled inside it as I lifted it over my shoulder. "Just remember the plan," I told Quincy. "And please, for the love of God, don't mess this up." I began walking toward the ghost. She floated toward me slowly, as if moving through water. A warm smile appeared on her lips as she reached out her hand. Her touch was ice cold. I forced myself to smile back at her. Her fingers passed through my face slightly, drifting through my skull in a strange, unreal way that sent a deep chill through my entire body. "What kind of relationship do you have with this dead lady?" Quincy asked nervously. It was a fair question. Over the years, I had developed a strange connection with the ghost. I spent countless nights sitting in that graveyard talking to her. She never spoke back, but she listened. At least, it felt like she did. The nights I used to spend with my reckless friends slowly disappeared. Instead, I found myself sitting beside the graveyard fence, telling stories to a woman who had been dead for more than a century. Over time, her sadness softened. She would smile at my stories. Not a happy smile exactly, but something close to comfort, like a mother watching a child she cared about deeply. Eventually, I began to care about her too, not in a romantic way, more like how a young boy cares about an aunt or a kind older relative. But her existence was tragic. She was trapped here, unable to leave. When she lowered her hand from my face, she turned and looked suspiciously at Quincy. "It's okay," I said gently. "He's here to help." "You're reassuring a ghost that I'm harmless?" Quincy said. I ignored him. The ghost drifted deeper into the graveyard, silently guiding us forward. We followed. It took me years to learn who she was. I spent countless hours digging through old newspaper archives at the local library. While other teenagers were dating or partying, I was reading century-old documents and government records. Eventually, I found her name, Abigail Witherspot. She had been the daughter of a governor, which made her somewhat famous in the area. But the records suggested she lived a quiet, private life. The real answers came later, when I began studying darker things, old occult texts, and strange historical writings that most people never even hear about. Those books told me what needed to be done. That was why Quincy was here tonight. He was the only real friend I had. We met at the library one afternoon, when he noticed how obsessed I was with searching the archives. He had never fully believed my story about the ghost, until now. Looking back, if Quincy had been a little smarter, he would never have followed me here. And if I had been a better friend, I never would have brought him. Quincy glanced at the bag on my shoulder. "Is that what I think it is?" "Yeah," I said. "How did you find her, kid?" I sighed. "Don't ask." Eventually, we reached the grave. The ghost stood beside it, staring down at the moss-covered stone with deep sadness. Her name had long since faded away. When I start digging, I told Quincy, "You start praying the rosary. Don't stop, no matter what happens. Got it? Promise." I began digging. Quincy started praying. Abigail Witherspot. The first time I said her name out loud, her reaction had been unforgettable. The look on her face was a mixture of shock, relief, and something close to joy. Imagine not hearing your own name spoken for over 100 years. The story I uncovered about her was incomplete. Her child had been murdered. Not long after, Abigail herself died under mysterious circumstances. The official report said she fell from a third-story window and broke her neck. But something about the story never felt right. For some reason, she had been buried miles away from her son. That was the key. I had traveled to another state to retrieve the boy's remains. That had been an interesting conversation with my grandparents. Someone had gone to great lengths to keep Abigail and her son apart, and their spirits could not rest until they were reunited. Unfortunately, something else had been watching the graveyard, something evil, and it had no intention of letting them leave. The worst mistake I made that night was asking Quincy to pray the rosary. He didn't truly believe. At the time, I wasn't sure I did either, but after everything I had seen with my own eyes, I knew something existed beyond our world. I had just finished uncovering Abigail's bones when it happened. Quincy's prayer suddenly faltered. "I told you not to stop," I shouted. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring into the forest. Something was there. A figure. Its smile was darker than the night itself, but its teeth shone bright in the moonlight. People say evil takes many forms. The form it took that night will never leave my memory. Before I could react, thick roots burst out of the ground. One wrapped tightly around my ankle. Another coiled around my leg and dug sharp thorns into my flesh. I screamed as they dragged me toward the grave. Quincy was screaming too. The roots were pulling both of us underground. Above the pit, the dark figure watched. Laughing, my hands searched desperately through the dirt until I found the glass vial. Holy water, the final part of the ritual. But the roots wrapped around my wrists and neck before I could open it. The pressure tightened. I couldn't breathe. Everything started going dark. The last thing I saw was Abigail covering her face, while the dark figure stood behind her like a shadow. Then everything went black. I woke up somewhere bright. The space around me was enormous and filled with light that seemed alive. A woman dressed in blue approached me. I recognized her from the paintings in my grandmother's house. She embraced me. The warmth I felt in that moment was impossible to describe. Then suddenly, I was back in my body. With a burst of strength, I crushed the vial in my hand and threw the holy water across the bones. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. The night went completely silent. The roots stopped moving. The laughter was gone. I ripped the vines from my neck and crawled out of the grave. "Ron, help!" Quincy yelled. He was nearly buried up to his neck. I pulled him out. Then I heard a soft voice behind me. "Thank you." I turned. Abigail stood there. She looked almost human now. Beside her stood a small boy. Her son. They both smiled as their forms slowly faded away like mist disappearing in the morning sun. They waved one last time. Then they were gone. Quincy collapsed onto the ground. "I am never hanging out with you again," he said. "Fair enough," I replied. That night changed my life forever. I became a ghost hunter, an exorcist, and every single day, I remember Abigail. Once you truly see evil, you understand something important. You must believe in the good. Story 2. My father died suddenly on a Tuesday afternoon. I was out of town on a business trip. When my mother called me, her voice sounded strange from the very first second, like all the strength had drained out of her body. The doctors had told her it was a massive heart failure. He had only been in the hospital for a minor procedure. He was supposed to recover, come home, and go back to his normal life. Instead, he had been sitting in his hospital bed one moment, and the next moment, he was gone. I booked the earliest flight I could get, but by the time I arrived at the hospital, they had already taken him away. I never got to stand beside his bed. I never got to hear his last words. I never got to say goodbye. The funeral passed in a blur. There were black suits, cheap coffee, quiet handshakes, and relatives I had not seen in years, suddenly acting like they were part of our daily lives. People kept speaking in soft voices, saying the same empty things over and over again. My mother looked completely broken. She did not sob or collapse. In some ways, that made it worse. She just moved through the house like someone hollowed out from the inside. When people spoke to her, she looked past them instead of at them. It was as if part of her had gone into the ground with my father. I stayed at the house for several days after the funeral to help with everything that follows death. There were forms to sign, calls to make, and 100 boring legal details that somehow still have to be handled when a family is falling apart. My mother barely spoke. Most of the time, she sat in her armchair in the living room, staring at the hallway as though she expected someone to come walking down it. Eventually, I had to return to my own apartment across the city. I had work waiting for me, deadlines piling up, and bills that were not going to stop just because my father had died. I told myself I would come back often to check on her. I told myself she would slowly start to recover. A week after the funeral, she called and asked me to come over. When I arrived, the house was dark. Every curtain was pulled shut, even though it was still daytime outside. The living room smelled stale, like the windows had not been opened once since the funeral. My mother was standing there beside 3 large cardboard moving boxes taped shut so heavily that the seams looked wrapped in layers of skin. She looked terrible. Her eyes were red and sunken. Her hands were shaking badly enough that she had to hold one wrist with the other hand just to keep it still. She did not greet me. She only pointed at the boxes. "Take these," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. I looked down at the boxes. "What are they?" "His clothes," she said. "His winter coats, his suits, his work boots. Everything he wore all the time." I bent down and tried to lift one of the boxes. It was much heavier than I expected. For a second, I almost dropped it. "I can take them to a donation center this weekend," I said. "Someone could use them." The moment I said that, she grabbed my arm so hard that her nails pressed through my sleeve and into my skin. I looked up at her in shock. "No," she said, and there was panic in her voice now. "Do not donate them. Do not give them yourself." I stared at her. "Then what do you want me to do with them?" Her breathing quickened. Tears filled her eyes almost instantly. "You need to burn them," she said. "Take them somewhere far away. Pour gasoline on them and burn every piece." I thought I had misheard her. Burn them. "Yes, Mom, these are expensive clothes. Dad took care of his things. Somebody could really use them." She shook her head so fast that it looked almost painful. "No, burn them, please. I can't do it. You have to do it." At that moment, I honestly thought grief had pushed her into some kind of breakdown. Losing a husband after 40 years could destroy a person. Maybe the thought of strangers wearing his clothes felt unbearable to her. Maybe she could not stand the idea of seeing those things in the house anymore. Maybe burning them felt cleaner in her mind than handing them over to someone else. I did not want to argue. "Okay," I said softly. "I'll take them and do it today." It was a lie, and I knew it the moment I said it. She let go of my arm, sat down heavily in her chair, and covered her face with both hands. I carried the boxes out one by one, loaded them into my trunk, and drove back to my apartment. Once I got home, I left the boxes in my living room and sat on the couch, staring at them for a long time. I felt guilty for lying to her, but the idea of burning my father's clothes felt wrong in a way I could not explain. He had been a practical man, hardworking and careful. He respected the things he owned because he had paid for them with years of labor. His thick coats, his good suits, his heavy leather boots. Those were not just clothes to me, they were pieces of him. Destroying them felt like helping erase him from the world. So I made a different decision. I took a pair of scissors, cut through the tape, and opened the first box. The smell hit me immediately. It was him. Old wool, laundry soap, and that faint metallic smell from the machine shop where he had worked for most of his life. That scent alone almost made me sit down and cry. Instead, I went out and bought a set of solid wooden hangers. Then I came back and carefully hung his things in my closet. The wool coats, the gray and navy suits, the flannel shirts he wore during colder months. I lined up his steel-toe work boots neatly on the closet floor beneath them. At first, it brought me comfort. Every morning before work, I opened the closet and saw his coat hanging there. For a second, I could almost believe he still existed somewhere nearby. It felt less like I was storing old clothes and more like I was protecting something important. But after a few weeks, I started noticing something strange. Clothes hanging on a rack should fall flat. The shoulders hold shape because of the hanger, but the rest of the fabric should hang empty and loose. My father's clothes did not do that. They stayed full. The chest of the trench coat pushed outward, as though something invisible was inside it. The sleeves curved gently instead of hanging straight down. The legs of the suit pants stayed open, shaped like they were wrapped around someone's legs instead of empty air. Every time I opened the closet, it looked like an invisible man was standing inside my father's clothes. It bothered me, but I tried to explain it away. He had been a broad-shouldered man. These were thick fabrics, stiff wool, strong leather, heavy materials that had probably taken on his shape over years of use. That seemed possible, even reasonable. Whenever it looked especially bad, I would press the clothes flat with my hands. I would smooth the chest of the coat, push the sleeves inward, and flatten the pants. The next morning they would be full again. Then, the sound began. It usually happened around 2 or 3 in the morning. I am a light sleeper, and my apartment is old enough that every sound carries strangely at night. I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling and hear a slow wheezing noise from the closet. It sounded wet, a long inhale, then a dragging exhale. Not quite human breathing, but close enough to make the hairs rise on the back of my neck. My building was built in the 1940s. The heating system is ancient, and the iron pipes in the walls make all kinds of strange noises. When the pressure changes, I knew that. I kept telling myself that. The main radiator pipe for my unit runs behind the wall of my bedroom closet. So I decided the sound had to be steam moving through an old valve. That explanation was thin, but it was enough to help me sleep. For several weeks, I ignored it. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning. I got up, showered, and walked into the kitchen to start the coffee maker. My apartment is small, with a hallway connecting the bedroom to the kitchen and front door. The kitchen floor is covered in cheap white linoleum. Right in the center of that floor were my father's work boots. They were placed neatly side by side, turned slightly outward. It was exactly how my father used to stand at the kitchen sink when he washed dishes. I froze. I live alone. I do not have a roommate. No girlfriend had a key. I do not own a dog or a cat. No one should have been in that apartment except me. I went straight to the front door. The deadbolt was locked. The chain was still fastened. I checked the windows. Every one of them was locked from the inside. I went back to the kitchen and looked at the boots again. My best explanation was sleepwalking. It sounded ridiculous, but it was still better than the alternatives. Grief can do strange things to people. Maybe I had gotten up in the middle of the night, carried the boots into the kitchen, arranged them without realizing it, and gone back to bed. I picked them up. They felt oddly heavy. When my fingers brushed the inside of the leather, it felt warm, not room temperature. Warm, like someone had just taken them off. A deep chill passed through me. Still, I carried them back to the closet and shoved them as far into the back corner as I could, behind some storage bins. The next day, I left for work at 8 and came home around 6. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and stopped almost immediately. My father's heavy trench coat was draped over one of the dining chairs. The chair had been pulled out from the table. The sleeves of the coat rested across the tabletop like arms. His work boots sat directly beneath the chair. It looked exactly like a man was sitting there waiting for dinner. The sleepwalking idea died right there. I had been gone all day. Someone or something had done this while I was at work. My first thought was that somebody was breaking into the apartment. The building superintendent had a master key. Maybe a former tenant still had a copy. Maybe somebody was playing a sick joke on me. I tore through the apartment looking for evidence. Nothing was missing. No drawers had been opened. My electronics were untouched. The small safe in my closet had not been moved. Nothing had been stolen. Whoever had entered had done one thing and one thing only. They had taken my dead father's clothes out of my closet and arranged them at the table. That frightened me more than a robbery would have. I decided I needed proof. I dug through a desk drawer until I found an old smartphone. The camera still worked, and I downloaded a free motion detection security app. That night, I put the coat and boots back in the closet, closed the door, and set the phone up in the kitchen. I leaned it against the coffee maker and adjusted the angle until it could clearly see the hallway, the front door, and my bedroom door. Then I plugged it into the wall so the battery would last all night. I turned out the lights, went into my bedroom, closed the door, and locked it from the inside. The wheezing from the closet sounded louder than ever that night. Deep, wet, and struggling, I put earplugs in, pulled the blanket over my head, and eventually fell asleep. At sunrise, I woke up and immediately checked the bedroom door. It was still locked. That gave me a brief moment of relief. I went to the kitchen, picked up the phone, and opened the app. It had recorded one long video file during the night. 3 hours and 42 minutes. I made myself some instant coffee, sat at the dining table, and started watching. For 2 hours, nothing happened. Just the dim yellow light from the street outside, touching the hallway. Then, at exactly 2:14 a.m., the bedroom door opened. I remember holding my breath, waiting to see a person step out. Instead, my father's clothes walked into the hallway. The trench coat, the gray suit pants, the heavy leather boots. Something was inside them, but whatever it was wrong. It was far too tall and impossibly thin. The coat hung loose over it, like a blanket thrown over sharp sticks. The pants sagged around legs that looked as narrow as broom handles. It moved in a broken way, not like a man. One boot stepped forward. Then it froze. Then the shoulders jerked violently. Then the other boot dragged after it. Step, pause, twitch, drag. I sat there frozen, unable to look away. Then it did something that shattered the last piece of my sanity. It stepped onto the wall. First one boot pressed flat against the drywall, then the other. Then it walked upward, slowly and calmly, as if the wall were a floor. It reached the ceiling and continued across it, crawling upside down toward the kitchen. At that moment, the open collar of the coat twisted around in a sudden snapping motion, so it was facing the camera. And because the thing was upside down, the sleeves and pant legs hung open. There were no arms, no legs, no body. The inside of the clothes was packed with pale, writhing tendrils. Thousands of them. They looked like worms, or white roots, sliding over one another in thick bundles. They twisted together to create the rough shape of limbs. Some spilled out of the sleeves and gripped the ceiling, pulling the rest of the body forward. The microphone on the phone picked up the wet, sliding sound they made. The thing crossed the ceiling, reached the kitchen, and dropped to the floor with a hard thud. Then it stood at the stove, and it began to act out my father's morning routine. It moved one sleeve in slow circles over an unlit burner, as if heating a pan. It reached toward the cabinet, as if opening it. It leaned the exact way my father used to lean when making eggs. That broke me. I stopped the video and dropped my mug. It shattered on the floor, but I barely noticed. My hands were shaking so badly that I could hardly hold my phone as I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. I did not waste time. "You need to tell me what you gave me," I said. I put up a camera. The clothes are moving around my apartment. There's something inside them. It isn't human. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she screamed, "I told you to burn them." The anger and fear in her voice were so intense that I pulled the phone away from my ear. "I told you exactly what to do. Why didn't you listen?" "What is it?" I shouted back. "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" "Get out of the apartment," she cried. "Don't ask questions. Just leave. Right now, I'm getting my car keys. I'm driving there. I'm not moving until you explain this." She took a long, shaking breath and then started talking in a whisper so fast I almost had trouble following her. "You weren't there when he died," she said. "I was sitting beside his bed holding his hand. The room was quiet. Then he sat straight up and pointed at the top corner of the room near the ceiling. I listened in silence. He said there was something there," she whispered. "Something he should not be able to see. He said it was looking back at him. Then he started screaming. He begged me to save him. He squeezed my arm so hard it bruised me. Then the monitor flatlined. She was crying openly now. The doctor said it was just his brain misfiring while he died. I tried to believe that. But a few days later, I started hearing boots in the hallway at night. His coats would be moved. I could feel something standing behind me in the kitchen. Something cold. Something wrong. Whatever he saw in that hospital room followed him home. It attached itself to the things he wore most. It was trying to become him. I felt sick. I wanted to burn the clothes, she said, but I was too afraid to even touch them. I could hear that wheezing from the closet. So when the house felt calm for a little while, I packed everything up and gave it to you. I thought if you burned them, it would end. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. I'm leaving now, I told her. Meet me outside. I hung up. I did not pack anything. I did not take a coat. I just wanted to get out. I walked to the front door and grabbed the handle. It would not turn. The deadbolt was jammed. I threw my weight against it, twisted with both hands, tried everything. Nothing moved. Then I reached for the ceramic bowl, where I always dropped my keys when I came home. It was empty. My keys were gone. A wave of pure panic hit me so hard that I had to grab the wall to stay upright. Then I looked at the old phone on the kitchen counter. I had only watched part of the recording. With shaking fingers, I hit play again. The thing finished pretending to cook. Then it walked down the hallway and entered my bedroom. The camera angle caught the edge of my bed. I saw myself sleeping under the blanket. The thing walked to my bedside and stood there. For 4 hours, it did not touch me. It did not lean down. It simply stood there, watching me while the pale tendrils slowly moved inside the coat collar, like a nest of living worms. At 5:50 a.m., just before my alarm usually rings, it turned away from the bed. It walked to the front door, reached into the ceramic bowl, took my keys, locked the door from the inside, and then went to the living room window. It opened the window and dropped my keys out onto the street 3 floors below. Then it went back into my bedroom, back into the closet. The door clicked shut. The video ended. I dropped the phone. I was trapped. The apartment went silent, the kind of silence that feels alive. Then I heard the closet door creak open. One heavy boot hit the floor. Then the other. A slow dragging sound followed, mixed with a wet squishing noise, like raw meat being kneaded inside fabric. It was walking out of the bedroom, coming down the hall. I did the only thing I could do. I ran. I threw myself into the bathroom, slammed the door, and locked the deadbolt. Then I backed into the bathtub and pulled my knees to my chest like a terrified child. I called emergency services and told them there was an intruder in my apartment. I said I was trapped in the bathroom and they needed to force the door. They said officers were on the way. Then I texted my mother and told her not to come inside. Now I am sitting here in the dark bathtub, writing all of this on my phone while I still can. The footsteps have reached the bathroom. I can see the shadow of the boots under the door. I can hear the wet, shifting sound on the other side, the steady movement of those tendrils pressing against the wood. The doorknob is turning slowly back and forth, not frantically, not wildly, patiently, like whatever is out there knows it has time. I do not know how long this door will hold. I do not know whether the police will get here in time. And I do not know what bullets can possibly do to something that is not really a man at all, but a nest of living darkness wearing the shape of one. If I do not make it out of this bathroom alive, then at least this much will exist somewhere. At least someone will know what happened in this apartment. At least someone will know that whatever my father saw in that hospital room did not stay there. It followed him home. It took his shape. It learned his habits. And now it is standing right outside this door, wearing his clothes, waiting for me to come out. Story 3. My first day at that job was Monday, February 9th. I kept telling myself it was only temporary, just something to do until I found something better. That was the story I repeated in my head every morning, mostly because the truth felt worse. I had been let go from my last job, and after that I had sent out 147 applications and heard almost nothing back. A few places never replied. A few seemed interested, and then disappeared. So by the time I accepted this position, it was not because I loved the work. It was because I needed money, and this place was willing to pay me $23 an hour. Honestly, there were worse ways to survive. It was a small office, and without saying exactly where I worked, I can say that it was a customer-facing role. That means if customers were not there was almost nothing to do. Since starting, I had seen a total of 5 customers. The work itself was dull, but it was easy enough, and boredom is a lot easier to deal with than panic over unpaid rent. The office staff was small, so I met everyone very quickly. There was Adam, an older man who seemed to avoid conversation whenever possible. There was Jane, an older retired woman, who, according to her, had only taken the job because she needed something to do. There was Elle, a college student who talked constantly and never seemed to notice when other people stopped listening. Kevin was around my age, maybe a little older, and he took the job far more seriously than anyone should take a place like that. Then there was Sandra, who introduced herself to me on the first day by saying, "Hi, I'm Sandra. I'm a teen mom." It was a strange group, but everyone seemed harmless enough. Beyond us were the 2 managers, Jeremy and Kate. On my first Friday, we had a staff meeting. It focused on 2 things. The first was introducing me as the new coworker. The second was talking about the remodeling planned for the weekend. Kate led the meeting, and she could barely contain her excitement. She went on and on about the new furniture, the paint color for the walls, and how much nicer the break room was going to look. Jeremy kept jumping in with fake enthusiasm, saying things like, "Oh wow, that sounds amazing," and "I bet the new chairs will be super comfortable." Nobody else seemed to care. Adam looked irritated. Kevin stared blankly at the table. Jane smiled politely. Elle asked 3 questions about whether the coffee machine would be upgraded. Sure enough, when I came in on Monday morning, the break room had been completely redone. The old room had been ugly. The walls had a dirty brown color that looked like it had once been white and had slowly given up over the years. The furniture had always been mismatched and worn out, but now everything looked fresh and expensive. The walls had been painted a soft light green. The counters were dark wood. There was a new refrigerator, a new microwave, and a set of new kitchen appliances that looked far better than anything we needed for an office that barely saw any staff activity. 3 round tables had been placed around the room, and each table had 4 matching chairs. I was the first employee to arrive that morning besides Kate and Jeremy, so I spent a little time walking around the break room and taking it all in. I tested the new coffee machine, partly because I was curious and partly because I wanted something to do before the day officially began. That was when Adam came in. "Good morning," I said. I did not expect much of a response, and I did not get one. He walked into the room and ran his hand along the new wooden counter, as if checking whether it was real. After a few seconds, he said, "How much do you think all this cost?" "I have no idea," I replied. He gave a short laugh, but there was no real humor in it. They couldn't give us a raise or a Christmas bonus, but they could do this. I did not know what to say, so I stayed quiet. Adam pulled out a book, sat down at one of the tables, and immediately began reading. A minute later, Jane came in. "Good morning," she said brightly. She stepped into the room, looked around, and gasped with dramatic excitement. "Oh, it's so much nicer in here," she said. I nodded. It really did look better. "Don't you think so, Adam?" she asked. Adam looked up from his book. "What?" I said. "Don't you think it looks nice in here?" "Sure," he said, "but I still think they could have just given us a raise. We don't need a $500 coffee machine." Jane laughed lightly, as if he were being silly. "Oh, Adam." She set her bag down beside his chair, then suddenly stopped moving. Her expression changed so quickly that it caught my attention right away. "Jane?" I asked. "Are you okay?" She did not answer at first. She looked around the room, then slowly stepped backward toward the door. Then she walked forward again, staring at the tables. "Jane?" I asked again. "Aren't there too many chairs?" she said. I looked around the room. "What do you mean? You think it feels crowded?" "No," she said quickly. "Not crowded, but aren't there too many chairs?" Adam sighed without looking up from his book. "What's wrong with the chairs?" Adam finally looked up. "You think there are too many because the room is small?" "No," she said, now sounding more upset. "There are just too many. 12, she said. I looked again. She was right. 3 tables, 4 chairs each. 12 chairs. "Yeah," I said slowly. "There are 8 of us," she said. I did not understand where she was going with that. "Okay." "There are 4 extra chairs," she said, and now her voice was getting louder. "Why are there 4 extra chairs?" Adam let out another tired sigh and returned to his book. I instantly regretted becoming part of the conversation. Jane kept staring at the chairs like they had personally insulted her. "Well, maybe it's just extra seating," I offered, "in case people want more space, or if management has visitors, or—" "No," she snapped. The sharpness in her tone made me stop talking immediately. "There are too many chairs," she said again, louder this time. "Why are there so many chairs?" Before I could respond, Kate poked her head into the room. "Everything okay in here?" she asked. I shrugged. Adam said nothing. Jane turned toward Kate with sudden intensity. "Why are there so many chairs?" she demanded. Kate blinked. "What?" "There are too many chairs," Jane said. "There are 12 chairs. Only 8 people work here." Kate looked at me as if I could explain. I just lifted my coffee and took a sip. "Jane," Kate said carefully, "it's just furniture. Is something bothering you?" Jane stepped forward so fast that I flinched. She grabbed Kate by the shoulders. "Why are there so many chairs, Kate?" she shouted. "Why? Okay, let's calm down. Why don't we step outside for a minute?" Jane turned suddenly, grabbed one of the chairs, lifted it over her head, and threw it straight at Kate. Everything happened so fast that I barely understood what I was seeing. Kate screamed. I think I did too. The chair hit the wall beside her and crashed to the floor. Adam did not even stand up right away. After that, the police came. The rest of us stood around in shocked silence as officers dragged Jane out of the building. While she kept screaming about the chairs, she sounded terrified, angry, and completely convinced that what she was saying mattered. The next day, no one really talked about her. There were 1 or 2 comments about hoping she was doing better, but that was it. It was as if everybody had silently agreed not to discuss what had happened. I found that strange, but I was new, so I did not push it. A few days later, a different topic replaced Jane. Adam did not come to work. Apparently that was unheard of. People told me he had perfect attendance for 8 straight years. If he thought he might be even a minute late, he would call ahead. But that day, nobody could reach him. Toward the end of the shift, we finally got an update. Kate came out and announced that Adam had been in an accident. Elle, who had been dying for gossip all day, immediately asked what kind of accident. "An accident," Kate said with a tight smile. "Right, but what kind?" Elle asked. "Did he fall? What happened?" "Adam had an accident," Kate repeated, still smiling in that weird, controlled way, and then she went back into her office. Elle stared after her. "That is so weird." Before I could stop her, She pulled out her phone. I'm calling him. Why? I asked. What if he's seriously hurt? He's not seriously hurt, she said. They would have told us. I'm not sure they would have, I said, but she was already dialing. When Adam answered, her face lit up with satisfaction. Hey, Adam, it's Elle from work. I heard you were in an accident. Are you okay? She paused, listening. Then her eyebrows slowly pulled together. Yeah, but what kind of accident? She asked. Another pause. Then she motioned for me to come closer and tilted the phone so I could hear. So, was it a car accident? She asked again. On the other end, Adam said in a flat voice, it was an accident. Elle looked at me, confused. Just an accident? She asked. Yeah, he said, an accident. There was something off about the way he said it. No frustration, no humor, no sign that he found the conversation annoying, just a flat repetition of the same words. Well, okay. Hope you feel better, Elle said, then hung up without waiting for more. She stared at the phone. How weird was that? I shrugged. Adam doesn't seem very talkative. But Elle was not satisfied. She spent the rest of the day talking about Adam, guessing what could have happened to him, and trying to get Sandra involved. When Sandra arrived for the afternoon shift, Elle told her the whole thing immediately. The two of them spent the rest of Elle's shift searching Adam's name online and making theories. The following week, Elle seemed to forget Adam entirely. That morning she arrived full of energy, talking about how she had signed up for a gymnastics class. She said she used to do gymnastics as a kid, and probably could have gone very far if her parents had not gotten divorced. According to Elle, she had once been on track to become something like a professional Olympic athlete. I did not ask questions. It was another slow day. Kevin and I sat there listening while she talked non-stop. Eventually, she stood up and asked, "Do you guys want to see some moves?" Kevin said yes right away. I did not answer. But that did not matter. Elle had already decided she was going to perform. She started with the splits. Then she stood up and did a backbend. Kevin actually clapped. Then she did 2 cartwheels across the office floor, narrowly missing a lamp. She turned back toward us with a huge smile. And for the finale, she said, taking a deep breath, a backflip. Even now, when I replay that moment in my head, it feels disjointed. 1 second she was smiling and preparing herself. The next second, there was a horrible snapping sound. She hit the floor hard. Her body went limp immediately. Her neck was bent at an angle that should not exist in the human body. For a moment, Kevin and I just stared. I do not remember who screamed first. I do not remember who called for help. I only remember the sound of that snap, and the way her smile had still been on her face a second before she fell. An ambulance came. We were sent home early. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face again, cheerful and proud, right before it happened. We reopened 2 days later. Sandra was called in to cover Elle's shift. Nobody spoke much that day. I think all of us were afraid of saying the wrong thing. I did not know these people well, but after seeing someone die in front of me, it felt impossible to act normal. Near the end of the shift, Sandra started complaining. She said she was annoyed that she had been asked to cover for Elle. According to her, Kevin had been asked first, but he claimed to have a family emergency, which she clearly did not believe. I did not respond. After a while, she sighed dramatically and said, "I'm taking my lunch." She had already taken lunch earlier, but I did not argue. There were no customers anyway. About 40 minutes passed. Sandra still had not come back, so I went looking for her. I found her in the break room, standing at the sink and washing a bowl. "Hey," I said. "I thought you left." She turned around and smiled at me. "No, I was just eating. I think I was hangry. I feel much better now." "Well, that's good," I said. She turned off the tap and faced me fully. "You've got a little." I gestured toward the corner of my mouth to show her. She wiped at the side of her lips with the back of her hand. That was when I saw it more clearly. "Is that blood?" I asked. She smiled again, perfectly calm. "No, I had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich." Then she walked past me and left the room. Something about that answer felt wrong. After she left, I looked into the sink. There was only the washed bowl sitting there. No plate, no knife, nothing else. I told myself I was just being paranoid because of everything that had happened in the last 2 weeks. I splashed cold water on my face. Then I tore off a paper towel, dried my hands, and lifted the lid of the trash can to throw it away. Inside was a dead rat. I shouted and stumbled backward. After a moment, I forced myself to look again. The rat was lying on top of the trash, and even before I fully processed what I was seeing, I felt my stomach turn. There were bite marks all over it. Human bite marks. I left work early that day. Kate did not even ask why. Jeremy stayed in his office the entire time. After that, nothing obvious happened for about a week. Sandra never came back. No explanation was given, no announcement. It was just Kevin and me now, sitting in silence most days, waiting for the occasional customer to wander in. This morning, when I came to work, there was already a customer inside. Kevin was helping an older man in a suit who carried a cane. Kevin kept glancing toward me while he spoke to the man, which I thought was strange. The customer stayed for about 10 more minutes after I arrived, then finally left. As soon as the door closed behind him, Kevin marched over to one of the computers and started typing furiously. I had not really spoken to him much over the last several days, but the tension coming off him was impossible to ignore. "Is something wrong?" I asked. He slammed the keys harder. "I'm emailing corporate." "Why?" "Because this place is bullshit," he snapped. "All of this is bullshit. Everything that keeps happening here, and management acts like it's normal. We get paid nothing, we get told nothing, and people keep disappearing or dying." I stared at him. "You're not wrong," I said carefully. "Nobody has said anything real about Elle, or Jane, or Adam either. It's like they were never even here." He kept typing. "And now Sandra is gone," I added. "I'm pretty sure she had some kind of breakdown. I think she ate a rat." Kevin's hands stalked over the keyboard. "What?" "I found a dead rat in the break room trash can," I said. "It had human bite marks. Sandra had blood on her mouth. It was disgusting." He looked at me for a long second, then turned back to the computer. "Oh yeah," he muttered. "And speaking of the break room, why are there so many fucking chairs in there?" At first, I almost laughed, because hearing that question again, after everything else, sounded absurd. Then, I stopped. I thought about it. There were only 4 of us left now. Me, Kevin, Jeremy, Kate. But there were still 12 chairs in the break room, and standing there, listening to Kevin breathe angrily through his nose, while the office sat unnaturally quiet around us, I suddenly remembered Jane's face that first Monday morning. Not annoyed, not confused, afraid. I looked toward the hallway that led to the break room. For the first time since starting that job, I did the math in a way that felt wrong instead of silly. There had been 8 of us. There were 12 chairs. 4 extra. Back then, I thought Jane had lost her mind over nothing. Now, I was no longer sure there had ever been extra chairs at all. I did not say that out loud. Kevin kept typing, muttering curses under his breath, probably writing a long email full of complaints that no one at corporate would ever read. The office lights buzzed softly overhead. Somewhere deeper in the building, I thought I heard a faint scraping sound, like a chair leg moving across the floor. I tried to ignore it. Maybe they just bought too many, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. Kevin let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Sure. He hit send with more force than necessary. Then he turned in his chair and looked at me directly. You ever notice how management never sits in there? I frowned. What? In the break room, he said. Kate and Jeremy were obsessed with remodeling it. They keep talking about how nice it looks. But they don't actually sit in there. They don't eat in there. They barely step inside unless they have to. I thought about it. He was right. Kate loved showing it off when customers or visitors came through, but I had never actually seen her sit at one of those tables. Jeremy only appeared in the doorway long enough to comment on the coffee machine or the furniture, before disappearing again. That cold, nervous feeling in my stomach got worse. Kevin stood up. Come here, he said. What? Come look. I should have said no. I should have stayed where I was and minded my own business. That had become my survival strategy in that place. Keep your head down. Do the work. Go home. But something in Kevin's face made me follow him. We walked toward the break room together. The hallway felt longer than usual. The building was quiet in a way that made every step sound too loud. When we reached the doorway, Kevin stopped and held a hand out like he was presenting a crime scene. Look, he said. I looked. The room was exactly the same as it had been since the remodel. Light green walls, dark counters, new appliances, 3 round tables, 12 chairs. Nothing looked out of place. Then Kevin pointed. See where they are? I frowned. What do you mean? The chairs, he said. Look at how they're placed. I studied them more closely. Each table had 4 chairs, yes, but they were not positioned evenly around the tables the way people normally set chairs. Instead, each group of 4 was arranged with one chair slightly farther back than the other 3, creating a strange shape. It looked less like a table with seats around it, and more like 3 little audience circles, or waiting spots. I suddenly remembered that on the first day, before Jane snapped, I had wandered in here alone and looked around. I remembered thinking the setup seemed a little odd, but I had not thought about it twice. Now it made my skin crawl. It's weird, I admitted. Kevin nodded. I checked the security camera feeds. That made me look at him sharply. You what? He lowered his voice. There's a camera in the hall outside Jeremy's office. It doesn't cover the whole break room, but it catches people going in and out. Last night I stayed late and pulled the footage. Are you serious? Yeah. What did you see? For a second, he did not answer. His face looked pale, and I realized he was genuinely scared. At around 11:30, he said quietly, Kate and Jeremy came out of their offices and went into the break room. So, they were carrying another chair. I looked back into the room. A slow coldness spread through my chest. That doesn't make sense, I said. No kidding. We already have 12. That's what I'm telling you, Kevin said. This morning, there are still 12. I turned to him fully. What are you trying to say? His jaw tightened. I'm saying I think there are supposed to be 13. A scraping sound came from inside the break room. Not loud, just enough to make both of us freeze. One of the chairs at the far table shifted very slightly, moving maybe an inch across the floor. Kevin took a step back. I told myself I had imagined it. The building settled. Furniture moved sometimes. Maybe one leg was uneven. Maybe. This time, I saw it clearly. It slid inward toward the table with a soft, dragging sound. Neither of us spoke. A third chair scraped across the floor. Not fast, not violent, just deliberate, like someone invisible was pulling it into place. Kevin whispered, "No." Every chair in the room began to move. They shifted a little at a time, scraping softly over the tile floor until all 12 were perfectly even around the 3 tables. And then, from somewhere deeper in the building, I heard footsteps, more than one set, slow, calm. Approaching the break room, Kevin backed away from the doorway so quickly he almost tripped over his own feet. "Who's here?" I whispered. He shook his head. "Nobody else is supposed to be here." The footsteps got closer. Then I heard something worse. Laughter. Not loud laughter, not happy laughter, just low, casual voices, as if people were chatting on their lunch break from somewhere just around the corner. I could not make out words, only tones and rhythms. Several people, maybe 4. My mouth went dry. Kevin grabbed my arm. "Come on," he said. But I could not move. The break room looked normal, completely normal. Bright walls, coffee machine, tables, chairs. And yet I knew, with a certainty I cannot explain, that if we stayed there much longer, we were going to see people enter that room who should not have been there. The footsteps reached the hallway just beyond our line of sight. Kevin pulled harder on my arm. That finally broke the spell. We ran. We did not stop until we reached the front area near the entrance. Kevin locked the front door, though I do not know why. If something was already inside the building, locking the door was useless. We stood there, breathing hard. The office was silent again. No footsteps, no laughter, nothing. After about a minute, Kevin said, "I'm leaving." I nodded. Yeah. He grabbed his coat. I grabbed my bag. Neither of us said goodbye to Jeremy or Kate. Neither of us checked their offices. As we hurried outside, I looked back once through the glass front door. The hallway to the break room was empty, but even from that distance, I could see the soft green wall inside. And just for a second, I thought I saw a shadow cross it. Not one shadow. Several. Kevin and I stood on the sidewalk in the cold for a while, both pretending we needed a minute before driving away. In truth, neither of us wanted to be the first to say what we were both thinking. Finally, Kevin spoke. "I'm not coming back." I looked at him and said, "Neither am I." That should have been the end of it. It should have been easy. Walk away, block their numbers, find another job, let the place ruin someone else's life. But here is the part I cannot stop thinking about. As I unlocked my car, my phone buzzed. It was an email notification from work, from Kate. The subject line was simple. Staffing update. I stared at it for a second before opening it. The message was short. "Thank you all for your patience during this time of transition. We are pleased to share that staffing is nearly complete again. Beginning next Monday, all seating in the break room will be in use. Please make everyone feel welcome." I read it twice, then a third time. My hands started shaking. Kevin was watching my face. What? I turned the screen toward him. He read it. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked up at the office windows, and very slowly, so slowly I almost wished I had not noticed, the blinds in the break room shifted open just enough for someone to look out. Story 4. I did not expect anything strange when I accepted the night shift at Blackwood Luxury Retirement Community. If anything, I thought it would be the easiest and nicest job I had ever had. Calling it a retirement home does not really describe it properly. The place looked more like a private resort for people with unlimited money. The lobby had polished marble floors that reflected the chandeliers above like still water. There was a grand piano near the entrance, and even though I never once saw anyone play it during my shifts, it always looked like it had been placed there to remind people what kind of place Blackwood was. Everything about the building was meant to signal wealth. There was a private dining hall where residents ate meals prepared by real chefs, not cafeteria workers. There was an indoor garden under a glass ceiling where tropical plants grew under soft lights. There was even a small theater where they held movie nights and private screenings. Most of the residents were unbelievably rich, not just comfortable, not just upper class. I mean the kind of rich where you hear their last names and realize they probably had buildings named after them somewhere. Former CEOs, hedge fund managers, politicians, donors, people whose money had probably lasted for generations. Their rooms were not really rooms at all. Most of them were massive private suites that felt closer to luxury apartments than anything in a normal care home. When I got hired, I thought I had finally caught a break. The pay was almost double what most retirement homes in the area offered, and I had enough experience to know how rare that was. The overnight shift was supposed to be especially easy. Most residents slept through the night, and my job would mostly be making rounds, checking call buttons, and handling the occasional late-night issue. At least that was what they told me during orientation. Most of the first day was normal. Paperwork, emergency procedures, medication protocols, signatures, the usual pile of forms you barely read because human resources keeps moving too fast for you to stop and process anything. The only thing that stood out happened near the end. The director, a calm woman with perfect posture and a practiced smile, was discussing facility rules when she mentioned restricted floors. Some parts of Blackwood are private medical areas, she said, specifically floor 11. Night staff are not authorized to access those floors under any circumstances. One of the new hires asked what was up there. She smiled, but there was something empty in it. Long-term residents, she said. That is all you need to know. At the time, I did not think much of it. Wealthy residents often pay for extra privacy, special treatments, private nurses, experimental medicine. Rich people always seem to have access to a different version of reality than everyone else, so I assumed it was something along those lines. Still, there was one thing that stayed with me during my first week. The residents at Blackwood were old, very old. A lot of them were in their 80s. Some were in their 90s. A few, according to their files, were pushing 100. And yet, many of them looked healthier than people 30 years younger. One of my first nights, I helped a resident back to his suite after he had spent some time in the indoor garden. His name was Harold Whitmore, and according to his chart, he was 97 years old. If I had not seen the paperwork myself, I never would have believed it. He stood up from his chair with no effort. He walked steadily beside me, without a cane, without shaking, without the careful slowness that usually comes with age. His balance was perfect. His grip was strong. He moved like a man in his 50s. Halfway down the hall, he stopped and looked at me. Not politely, not casually. He studied me. Then he smiled just a little and said, "Good, very good." I asked him what he meant, but he only gave a quiet little chuckle and kept walking. I told myself he was just eccentric. Nothing truly strange happened until about 2 weeks later. The overnight shift was usually silent. Most residents were asleep by 10. After midnight, the hallways felt almost deserted, apart from the low hum of air vents and the occasional soft chime of a call button. Somewhere in the distance, around 1 in the morning, Jake and I started our rounds. I had floors 1 through 5. He had 6 through 10. Jake had only been there a little longer than me, and I would not say we were close. But we had started to settle into that easy work friendship you get when you survive the same shifts together. He joked a lot when he was nervous, and he always acted more confident than he really was. He was the kind of person who said everything was fine, even when it clearly was not. I was finishing my check on the 4th floor when the hallway lights flickered. I sighed and made a mental note to report it to maintenance. Then I heard a door open. Room 408. Margaret Love. She was 88, according to her file, with moderate dementia. I had spoken to her before, and she was usually confused, but gentle. That night she stood in the doorway, wearing only a bath towel. Her gray hair was messy, and her expression was blank. She stepped into the hall, whispering the same words over and over. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. Her voice was soft, but perfectly steady, same rhythm every time. I walked toward her slowly. "Miss Love?" I said gently. "Are you okay?" She stopped a few feet in front of me and frowned like she was trying to place my face. "When is it time for my turn?" she asked. Then she tilted her head. Tick-tock. A cold feeling moved through my stomach. I kept my voice calm. "Let's get you back to bed, okay?" I reached for her hand. The moment our skin touched, her fingers tightened around my wrist with shocking force, not the grip of a weak elderly woman. It hurt badly enough that I nearly pulled away. She leaned close, staring directly into my eyes. "My sweet grandson," she whispered. "Why are you here? You must leave right now." Then, just as quickly, the pressure vanished. Her face changed. She looked confused again, almost sleepy. I guided her back to her room and helped her settle into bed. When I stepped back into the hall, my heart was beating harder than it should have been. Something about that moment felt deeply wrong, not just unsettling. Wrong. I had just pulled her door closed when my radio crackled. Jake's voice came through, sharp with panic. "Get to floor 8. Code D. I repeat, Code D." I ran to the elevator and hit the button over and over, even though it did not make it come faster. When I reached the 8th floor, Jake was already kneeling beside a man lying on the carpet. The resident was motionless, gray around the mouth, not breathing. Jake had started CPR. I yanked out my phone to call 911. Before I could dial, the elevator doors opened. 2 men stepped out. They were not paramedics. They wore dark scrubs, plain and unmarked. No name tags, no logos, no badges. Nothing that explained who they were or why they had arrived so quickly. One of them looked down at the resident on the floor, then at my phone. "Don't call emergency services," he said. I stared at him. "What?" "You heard me," he said. "Calmer now. We'll handle this." The 2 men moved past us like this was routine. They lifted the resident from the floor and carried him into the elevator as if he weighed nothing. Jake and I just watched. No explanation, no urgency, no paperwork, nothing. When they were gone, Jake and I stood there in stunned silence. We eventually returned to the office and tried to make sense of what had happened. We talked in low voices, half joking because the alternative was admitting how disturbed we were. We wondered if Blackwood had some private medical team on call for its rich residents. Maybe they were getting some experimental treatment. Maybe there was some legal reason they did not want outside hospitals involved. Every possible explanation sounded bad. At the end of the shift, as we were clocking out, my manager came over. "I heard about last night's incident," she said softly. "Mr. Davidson is stable." Jake and I looked at each other in confusion. Stable? The man had looked dead. Before we could ask anything, she turned to Jake. "Jake, can we speak in my office? Just to go over things in more detail." Jake looked annoyed, but followed her. I went home feeling uneasy, and I could not stop thinking about what Margaret had said to me. "You must leave right now." My next shift was after the weekend. Jake was not there. At first I assumed he was sick, or maybe running late, but no one mentioned him. When I asked, my manager just said he would not be in, and that I would be working alone that night. The building felt different without him. Too quiet. Too still. Every little sound seemed louder. I made my rounds and kept trying to ignore the nervous feeling building inside me. By the time I got to the 10th floor, nothing had happened. I actually started to relax a little. I was on my way back to the elevator when it chimed. The doors opened. A resident I had never seen before was standing inside. He did not get out right away. He just looked at me with dull, unfocused eyes. I stepped toward the elevator, ready to help if he was lost or confused. Then I noticed the lit number above the door. My chest tightened. Restricted floor. The resident did not move. He just stood there. For a moment, I should have walked away. That would have been the smart thing to do, but something inside me had been building for days. Too many strange moments. Too many unanswered questions. Too much silence every time something serious happened. So I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed behind me. When it opened again, floor 11 was dimly lit in soft blue light. The hallway was cold, much colder than the rest of the building. There were doors on both sides, all identical, all shut. No nurse's station, no reception desk, no signs, just silence. I moved slowly down the hall. One of the doors was slightly open. I told myself I was only going to peek inside for a second. Cold air spilled out when I pushed it open farther. At first, my brain had trouble processing what I was looking at. Then, it clicked. Beds. Rows of medical beds. People lying in them. Tubes ran from their mouths. Monitors blinked softly in the darkness. Some of the people were restrained with leather straps. Their skin looked pale and drained, and many of them seemed too young to be residents of a luxury retirement home. One of the beds held a woman who looked like she could not have been older than 30. Her cheeks were hollow, and her body looked as if something essential had been slowly taken from it over time. My whole body went cold. Then I heard footsteps in the hall. I dropped instantly and slid under the nearest bed, pressing myself against the cold floor. 2 men entered the room. Dark scrubs. No name tags. One of them was someone I recognized from the night on the 8th floor. A third voice came from deeper in the room. Old, weak, raspy. "So," the voice said, "which one will heal me, doctor?" I could barely breathe. One of the men answered, Jake Matthews is almost a perfect match. The world seemed to tilt around me. I dug my fingers into the floor so hard it hurt. The doctor continued in the same calm tone a person might use to discuss a routine blood test. In the next few days, we'll harvest his entire essence. It will be processed into serum and administered in stages. The effects should last about 6 months. The old voice gave a dry little laugh. Poor boy, he said, trading his life for a few more healthy months. They all signed the agreement. The doctor said, they are compensated. They understand the sacrifice. The men chuckled quietly. Then they left. I stayed under the bed for what felt like forever, shaking so badly I thought the frame would rattle above me. Tears kept running down my face, but I did not dare wipe them away. All I could hear were soft monitor beeps, gurgling breaths, and occasional weak whimpers from the people in the beds. When I finally crawled out, my legs felt numb. I moved through the room, looking for Jake. I found him in one of the beds near the far wall. He was alive, barely. A tube was in his mouth. His eyes were half open, but he looked drugged and terrified at the same time. Machines beside him traced his heart rhythm. I did not have a plan. I just knew I could not leave him there. I grabbed the tube and tried to pull it out. Jake's body jerked violently. His eyes flew open wide. He made a terrible choking sound. The monitor beside him began to beep faster and faster. "Come on," I whispered desperately. "Come on, Jake." Then alarms started going off. Loud, sharp, impossible to ignore. Footsteps thundered in the hallway. I froze for half a second, then survival took over. I ran. I sprinted from the room and down the hall just as several men in dark scrubs turned the corner. Someone shouted. A door slammed open behind me. I hit the elevator button again and again, hearing footsteps closing the distance. The doors opened. I stepped in. One of the men lunged at me just before they shut. He had something in his hand. A scalpel. The doors slid closed, inches from his arm. I think I stopped breathing until the elevator reached the first floor. When the doors opened again, my manager was standing there waiting for me. She was not surprised to see me. 2 men in black suits stood beside her. "We need to talk," she said. I tried to move past them, but the 2 men blocked me so smoothly it felt rehearsed. "Please," she said, still calm. "No one needs to get hurt. Just come with me. We can discuss a solution." I had no real choice. She led me into her office and shut the door. The room smelled faintly like expensive perfume and coffee. Everything inside was perfectly neat. Then she sat down and slid a folder across the desk toward me. "You are a very good match for one of our residents," she said. I stared at her. Inside the folder were documents with my name on them. Medical charts, vitals, notes about my blood work, body type, age, and health. Pictures of me from security footage. Every page seemed designed to reduce me from a person into usable material. "We can make this easy," she said. "Your family would be compensated very generously. You would not feel pain." I looked up at her, unable to speak for a moment. Then I said, "No." She folded her hands neatly on the desk. "You should think carefully." "I already have." "You are reacting emotionally." "I saw people upstairs." I said, "I saw what you did to Jake. I'm going to the police. I'm going to the press. I'm going public with everything." Her expression changed very slightly. Not anger, not panic, just mild disappointment. "You signed a non-disclosure agreement during orientation," she said. That agreement gives Blackwood broad authority over private medical operations and staffing discretion. Legally, you have almost no ground to stand on. I laughed once, but there was no humor in it. You think an NDA covers murder. She held my gaze. You would be surprised what wealth can cover. I stood up. She did not try to stop me. But as I reached the door, she said in a quiet voice that chilled me more than anything else that night, "There won't be an offer next time." I left the building shaking. I did exactly what I told her I would do. I contacted journalists. I sent emails. I made calls. I posted everything I could think of online. I described the restricted floor, the people in the beds, the private medical staff, Jake, all of it. Nothing happened. Messages disappeared. Posts were removed. Calls went nowhere. One journalist's assistant told me there was no evidence and stopped replying after that. Another number suddenly disconnected and never worked again. My social media accounts were flagged and temporarily locked within hours. It was like every road ended in fog. Blackwood had too much money, too many lawyers, too many people protecting it. For days, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that room on the 11th floor. I saw the woman in the bed. I heard that old man's voice asking which body would heal him next. And the worst part was this: I knew they were not finished with me. Jake was gone. No one would help. No one would listen. And if Blackwood could not use me willingly, they would just wait until they could use me another way. That was 3 weeks ago. I have moved twice since then. I do not stay in one place long. I barely answer calls. I check every hallway before entering it. I do not trust elevators anymore. Yesterday I got a letter with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No signature. No logo. Just one sentence typed neatly in the center. Your evaluation remains active. I do not think I have much time, so I am writing everything down as clearly as I can, while I still can. Because if anything happens to me, I want there to be some record that this place exists, and that what is happening there is real. Blackwood is not a retirement home. It is a feeding ground for the rich. It is a place where dying people with money can buy months of health using bodies like spare parts. Except it is worse than organs, worse than blood, worse than bone. They are taking something deeper, something harder to name. Essence. Life. Whatever you want to call it. I only know I saw what remained of the people they had already started draining, and they looked emptier than sick people should look. Like they had been hollowed out from the inside while still breathing. And if you ever get offered a night job at Blackwood Luxury Retirement Community, do not take it. I do not care how much they offer. I do not care how desperate you are. Do not go into that building. Do not sign anything. And if someone there ever looks at you a little too long and says, "Good, very good," you need to walk out while you still can. Story 5. I woke up in the White Room. That was what I called it, though I had no idea what anyone else might have named it. The room was not large, but it was not small either. It was just big enough for a bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a bathroom. Every surface was white. The walls were white. The floor was white. The ceiling was white. Even the lights seemed designed to erase all warmth from the place. They were placed so carefully that no shadows ever formed. No matter where I stood, no matter how I moved, I could never find a dark corner. In one corner stood a narrow bed with stiff sheets. Above it hung a digital clock with bright white letters and numbers against a black screen. Without that clock, I would have had no way to know what time it was or even what day of the week I was living through. On the wall beside the bed was a thin sliding hatch. At certain times, It would open just enough to deliver a bowl of tasteless porridge, a carton of milk, or sometimes a fresh set of plain clothes. In the center of the room sat a small table with 2 chairs. On top of the table rested a wooden chessboard. There were only 2 doors. One led to a small bathroom, also white, also spotless, also impossible to feel comfortable in. The other door stayed locked, unless she came through it. And then there was the mirror. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary mirror built into the wall. I never cared much about my appearance, so in the beginning, I only glanced at it when I passed by. But as the days stretched on, I began to feel uneasy every time I looked at it. That feeling grew so slowly I did not notice it at first. It was like the sensation of standing too close to the edge of something deep and not knowing why your body wants to step back. Eventually, I understood. It was not just a mirror. Someone was watching me through it. I could feel it all the time, every hour, every day, even when I slept, especially when I slept. That morning, if morning was even the right word for a place where the light never changed, I played a game of chess by myself. I had done this many times before. I wore the same kind of pale, colorless clothes they always gave me. I ate the same flavorless food. I sat across from myself and moved the pieces one after another, keeping my mind busy, because I had learned very early that silence becomes dangerous when you have too much of it. The only real change in my life came every Tuesday at exactly 4 in the afternoon. At that hour, the locked door would open, and Shiro would enter the room. That was not her real name. At least, I did not think it was. She had never told me her name. But after a few months of living in that white prison, I had started calling her Shiro in my mind. It seemed wrong for someone to come and go every week without any name at all, and somehow the name felt right for her. Pale, quiet, cold. I hoped if she ever learned of it, that she would not mind. Every Tuesday she entered, sat across from me, and played a game of chess. We never spoke. Not before the game, not during it, not after it. When the game ended, we stood, shook hands, and she left. Her hand was always ice cold, so cold it almost felt unreal. After that, I returned to complete solitude and waited for the next Tuesday. Once, while we were playing, I glanced toward the large mirror and said, "They're watching us." She gave no sign that she had heard me. Instead, she reached across the board with one pale hand and placed her pawn face to face with mine. We continued the game as if I had said nothing. That was how it usually went. She looked to be 14, maybe 15, though it was difficult to be sure. Her face was young, but her eyes were not. Her pale blue eyes had a strange emptiness to them, as if she had seen too much for someone her age and had already decided the world was not worth caring about. Long white hair framed her face in soft strands, though she never seemed to notice when it fell across her cheeks. She sat perfectly still while she studied the board, leaning slightly forward, her expression blank, her body so quiet that sometimes I found myself wondering whether she was even breathing. The first time I met her, I thought I was dreaming. My last memory before waking in the white room was lying down in my own bed, in my own home. So when I first opened my eyes to those white walls and strange clothes and that impossible silence, I assumed I was trapped in a lucid dream and would wake up soon enough. I noticed the metal collar around my neck, but even that did not shake me fully awake. Dreams are strange. You accept impossible things in them. At exactly 4, the locked door opened. A young girl stepped inside. Her dress was white, like an old-fashioned nightgown, hanging down just below her knees. She was barefoot. A pale blue headband held part of her long white hair in place, though several loose strands had escaped and hung along the sides of her face. I opened my mouth to ask who she was. Before I could speak, a sharp, burning pain stabbed through my head. I doubled over instantly, clutching at my scalp and gasping. The pain felt alive, as if something inside my skull had suddenly woken up and was trying to tear its way out. By the time it eased enough for me to think again, she was standing directly in front of me, watching with no visible emotion. Then she spoke. "Remember this," she said. "If you take one step outside this room, your collar will activate, and you will die. If you try to harm me, your collar will activate, and you will die. If you refuse to play chess with me during our allotted time, you will die. Understood?" I stared at her, still trying to recover from the pain. "Who are you?" I asked. "What is this place?" She did not answer. She sat down at the table and looked at the board. "Play," she said. "What? Why?" The silence stretched long enough for me to understand that I had no choice. So I sat down and played. She was clearly unfamiliar with the game then. I beat her in less than 10 minutes. When I checkmated her, she simply gave a small nod, as if losing had been expected. Then she stood up. I did the same. She held out her hand. "Can you at least tell me your name?" I asked as I shook it. She stared at me for a few seconds, then pulled her hand away, turned, and walked out of the room. At the time I thought, what a strange dream. Then the next day came, and the next, and the next. The clock kept moving. The lights never dimmed. Thursday passed, Friday passed, Saturday, Sunday. By Monday, I was too exhausted to lie to myself anymore. This was no dream. I was trapped. Once I accepted that, I did all the things any person would do. I searched the room for cracks, vents, hidden openings. I tried to figure out why anyone would take me. I was not rich. I was not important. I was not the kind of person people kidnapped for ransom, or politics, or revenge. I pounded on the locked door. I shouted until my throat hurt. I demanded answers from the empty room. I tried to reason with the mirror, with the silence, with the invisible people who were watching. Now, when I think back on it, I almost feel embarrassed. It was all so useless. Obviously, the people keeping me there were not going to answer my cries or leave me some easy path to freedom. A captor who does that would not remain a captor for very long. The following Tuesday, at exactly 4, the door opened again, and the girl returned. I had spent days preparing questions, rehearsing my anger, building up all the fear and confusion inside me. The moment she stepped through the door, I rushed toward her, but she ignored me. She walked directly to the table, sat down, and waited for the game to begin. That day I had no patience left. I marched over, slammed both hands on the table, and knocked several pieces over. Some rolled across the wood, others fell to the floor. "Answer me," I shouted. My voice sounded raw and thin after days of screaming at the door. "Where am I? What do you want from me?" That only made me angrier. I grabbed her arm. The instant I did, another voice spoke. It was calm, mechanical. Cold collar activation in T-5, 4, 3, 2. I let go of her so fast that I stumbled backward. The voice stopped immediately. It had come from the collar around my neck. For the first time since arriving in the White Room, true fear hit me. Not confusion, not panic. Fear. My hand rose instinctively to the collar, and it suddenly felt tighter than it ever had before. The girl turned her head just enough to look at me over her shoulder. Her eyes were ice. She did not need to say it again. The warning from my first day rang clearly in my mind. If you try to harm me, your collar will activate, and you will die. Then she turned back to the board, calmly straightened the fallen pieces one by one, folded her hands in her lap, and waited. I took a shaking breath and sat down across from her. That day, I made my first move more carefully than I had ever made any move in my life. Over time, chess became my only form of structure, my only real occupation, my only defense against the endless emptiness of that room. I played alone when Shiro was gone. I set up puzzles. I practiced openings. I replayed old matches in my head. I worked through checkmates and traps and patterns, because it was one of the only things I still had. I had never been a great master, but I was not weak either. I had won several competitions when I was younger. People told me I had talent. I never pursued it seriously. For me, chess had always remained at the edge of my life, something important, but never central. I learned it because of my father. When I was a boy, it was the only game he ever played with me. He would come home from work tired, carrying all the invisible burdens grown men seem to carry. And yet, he would still smile and call for me and ask if I wanted a game. No matter what I was doing, I always said yes. I could remember that clearly for a long time. I could remember his smile. I could remember the joy of cornering his king and realizing there was no escape. I could remember the sweet thrill of saying checkmate and watching him laugh in that deep, warm voice of his. He would laugh, then reach out his hand across the board and say, he would say. I froze. The word would not come. I stared at the pawn in my hand, willing memory to return, but it only grew more slippery. My fingers loosened without me noticing, and the pawn fell to the floor and rolled away. I tried harder. My father would come home. He would smile. He would say my name, my name, my name. What was it? I could feel panic rising, thick and ugly. That was only the beginning. At first, I forgot little things. A favorite restaurant, the face of an old neighbor, the key to my front door. Those things frightened me, but I told myself they were unimportant. Stress does strange things to the mind. Isolation does worse. Then the losses grew larger. I began to forget laughter, my child's laughter, my wife's voice, my best friend's jokes, my parents' faces. I knew those memories had once existed because I could feel their absence like empty spaces in my chest. But when I tried to reach for them, there was nothing there. I started walking the room and repeating names aloud, determined to keep them alive. But names turned into sounds. The sounds lost meaning. Then even the sounds disappeared. I had no paper, no pen, nothing to preserve them with. And even if I had written everything down, I think the result would have been the same. I would have eventually looked at those words and felt no connection to them. They would have belonged to some stranger whose life I had never lived. The white room was swallowing me, and yet some things stayed. Chess stayed. I remembered every game I had played with Shiro, every opening, every variation, every quiet defeat that settled into her eyes at the end. I remembered how to force checkmate with a bishop and knight. I remembered forks, pins, en passant, traps, sacrifices, patterns. Those remained perfect and untouched, as if someone had decided they should survive, while everything else was allowed to rot away. I also remembered the rules of the collar. I remembered, I was trapped. I remembered I was being watched, and I remembered Shiro. Every word she had ever spoken remained sharp inside me, even when entire parts of my life had fallen away into blankness. Sometimes, in blind anger, I would blame the invisible watchers more than the prison itself. They never touched me again after bringing me there. They never activated the collar. They never entered the room while I was conscious. But they were killing me anyway. Not with knives or poison, with subtraction. One memory at a time. One piece at a time. Once, in a fit of hopeless rage, I grabbed the chessboard and hurled it at the mirror. The board crashed against the glass. Pieces scattered everywhere across the white floor. The mirror did not crack. Not even slightly. I went to it, pressed my hand against the cold glass, and stared at my reflection, trying desperately to see through it, to meet the eyes of the people who watched me. "Why are you doing this to me?" I asked. There was no answer. There never was. Then came the Tuesday, when Shiro spoke again. I had greeted her politely that day. "Good afternoon, Shiro," I said when she entered. "I hope you don't mind that I call you that." She gave no reply, as expected, and sat at the table. I picked up a pawn, turned it in my fingers, and then set it down without making a move. "I do not feel like playing today," I said. For the smallest moment, she lifted her head. That was enough to tell me she was listening. "On my first day here," I continued, touching the collar at my neck, "you explained several rules. If I step outside the room, I die. If I harm you, I die. If I refuse to play, you said I would die. But you never explained how. You only said the words. That seems a little vague, does it not? After all, everyone dies eventually." I glanced at the clock. Perhaps I should simply wait and see. When I looked back at her, she was staring at me directly. "Play," she said. "I'm sorry, but—" She stood up so suddenly that I flinched. She picked up the pawn I had left aside and returned it to its starting square. "Play. Why?" I asked. "Why must we keep doing this?" Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something in them that had not been there before. Fear. "Play," she said quietly, "or they will kill us both." My throat tightened. "Who will?" She shook her head, sat back down, and lowered her gaze. She did not answer. She did not need to. In that moment, I understood something I had never fully considered before. Shiro was a prisoner too. Maybe not in the same way as me, maybe not in the same room, but trapped all the same. I could not let her die for my rebellion now that I knew. So I made the first move. She did not respond. At first I thought she had not seen it. Then I noticed her shoulders trembling. She was whispering something under her breath. "Shiro?" I said gently. "It's your turn." Her breathing quickened. She clutched both sides of her head. Then I heard the words, "I'm going to die. I'm going to die." She repeated it again and again, faster each time. I stood up and moved toward her. "Shiro, calm down. No one is dying." But she was already gone from me, lost inside pure terror. "I'm going to die. I'm going to die. Help me. Help me. I don't want to die. I don't want to die." Then she began screaming. Not a scream of anger, not even a scream of pain. It was the raw, helpless scream of someone facing something unspeakable, something certain, something beyond escape. The sound filled the white room and bounced off the walls until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. I froze. There was nothing I could do. I knew that with terrible certainty. Anything I tried would only make it worse. Then something inside the collar pricked at my neck. My vision blurred immediately. My body grew heavy, impossibly heavy, as though invisible hands were forcing me downward. My knees gave out, and I collapsed to the floor. The locked door burst open. Heavy footsteps entered the room. I tried to turn my head, tried to see, but I could barely move. Then I heard 3 sounds: a bang, a wet splatter, a body hitting the floor. After that came silence. Cold, absolute silence. Somewhere through the haze, a woman's voice drifted toward me. It sounded calm, almost interested, like a scientist observing a result she had not expected. An unforeseen turn of events, she said. Fascinating. Are you watching this? Unfortunately, it has left quite a mess. She kept speaking, but her words were already slipping away from me. My consciousness was sinking too quickly. The room, the voice, the white light, all of it drifted farther and farther out. And then there was nothing at all. Story 6. This is a warning, though I know most people will not believe me. I have seen a place that should not exist. I walked beneath a red sky that looked sick and alive at the same time. I saw mountains so huge, their peaks vanished into the darkness above. I heard chants rising from black towers deep in an abyssal landscape, and I watched armored beings move through that place, with bones hanging from their black metal armor, each step making a dry, rattling sound that still comes back to me in my sleep. People love to compare terrible journeys to Dante, but that comparison feels almost childish now. Dante had a guide. I did not. I only had another victim beside me, and even she was taken from me. I was never a religious man. If anything, what happened to me made me even less willing to believe in a loving God. Maybe I have sinned in my life. I am sure I have. But if some God created the place I saw, then whatever made that world has committed a greater evil than I ever could. If the same force made both our world and that one, then I can only assume one exists to feed on the other. And if that is true, then people like us are not children of creation. We are livestock. I need to explain this from the beginning, because if I start with the worst part, it will sound even more insane than it already does. My friend Sam and I were explorers. That was how we made our money. We traveled to abandoned places, took photographs, wrote blog posts, and posted videos. Sometimes it was urban exploration in broken-down hospitals, neglected government buildings, empty factories, or flooded tunnels. Other times we went into the deep woods, looking for places that had been swallowed by nature. We found old amusement parks, decaying mills, forgotten neighborhoods, even entire ghost towns that looked like time had simply stopped. Our final trip started like many others with a blog post. The title was simple: Abandoned, Haunted Military Site. That was enough to catch our attention. We had visited plenty of so-called haunted places before, and had never seen anything we could not explain. Military sites like this were usually old Cold War or Second World War facilities that had been abandoned and left to rot after governments downsized or shifted priorities. Most of the time, the haunting stories were just bait to make the location sound more mysterious. The blog included a handful of photographs showing chain-link fences, covered in vines, and concrete buildings hidden deep in the trees. The person who wrote it claimed to have seen lights hovering over the forest at night. They also mentioned stories from locals about monsters, strange howls, missing hikers, and screaming heard after sunset. We had read things like that 100 times before. It was seasoning, a little fear added to the scenery to make the pictures more exciting. Still, the post included a location tag. We checked satellite maps and topographic maps and confirmed that there really were structures in that part of the forest. That was enough for us. We packed our gear and left the next morning. It took 12 hours to drive there, and on the way, we kept trying to find more information about the site. Unfortunately, by the time we looked again, the original blog post had been removed. That happens sometimes. A lot of urban explorers did not want the liability of publicly encouraging trespassing, even if the land was an illegal gray area. Our rule had always been simple: leave no trace. If we entered a place, we did not break anything, steal anything, or leave any sign that we had been there. Part of that came from respect. Part of it came from wanting to preserve the beauty of decay. There is something strangely elegant about places being reclaimed by time, and we hated the idea of ruining that. In this case, the site was on a huge stretch of public land, which made it a lot less risky than usual. Sam worked out our route using GPS, trail maps, and a topographic map. No marked trail passed close to the site. The nearest one ended about a mile away, so we knew the last part would be rough. It was rough, but there is no point in dragging you through all the details of that first day. We hiked, we sweated, we cursed at the terrain, and by nightfall, we set up camp under a clear sky. That was when we realized the blog had not been entirely full of nonsense. There were lights in the sky. They moved above the treetops in ways that made no sense, darting at impossible speeds, and stopping so suddenly it looked unnatural. We watched them for hours without understanding what they were. We also heard strange cries from somewhere far off in the forest. At first, they sounded almost human, like screaming. Later, I convinced myself they were probably foxes or bobcats. If you have ever heard those animals in the woods at night, you know how horrifying they can sound if you are not expecting them. The next morning, we left what little trail there was and followed a winding stream through the forest. That was when we first noticed the sulfur smell. It was strong enough to stand out, but not overpowering. We guessed it might be some kind of contaminated spring or mineral deposit. We also noticed something else. There were no animals, no birds, no deer, no insects buzzing in the brush, nothing. The woods felt too still. At the time, we brushed it off. We thought we were far enough from normal trails that the wildlife had simply learned to avoid people. Eventually, we reached a chain-link fence. We followed it, looking for a way in that did not involve cutting it. Again, leave no trace. If there had been no opening, we would have turned around. But there was an open gate. We walked through. The first strange thing inside the fence was the forest itself. Around the buildings were trees that looked far older than they should have been. Massive oaks, elms, hemlocks, thick trunks, huge canopies, and deadfall everywhere. It looked less like forest reclaiming a 50-year-old site and more like ancient woodland that had somehow grown around the ruins over centuries. We stopped and stared for a while. The whole place looked like a future where humanity had disappeared and nature had swallowed the last remains of us. We took pictures and headed toward the nearest structure. It looked like an office building. Before going in, we put on our respirators. Any decent explorer does. Mold, bad air, gas buildup, chemical rot, those things can kill you faster than any ghost story. Inside, the first thing we noticed was the technology. There were flat-screen monitors still sitting on desks, cell phones, other office equipment that was too modern for a place supposedly abandoned for decades, One desk had a rectangular object on it coated in dust and moss. I picked it up and turned it over. There was an old Apple logo on the back. It was an early iPhone. That made no sense at all. The place could not have been abandoned for 50 years if something like that was left behind. I remember looking around the room and wondering if the people who built the place had somehow built around those enormous trees, which would have been absurd. I did not get long to think about it, because Sam called me over to a stairwell. We went down into the basement. The darkness swallowed us almost immediately, and we switched on our headlamps. A strange current of air moved at our backs, not harsh or violent, but steady, almost guiding us downward. The basement was huge. Most of the room seemed empty, except for things pushed against the far walls. Beyond the reach of our lights, the shadows in that place did not behave properly. They shifted too much. They seemed to move independent of our lamps, sliding along the edges of our vision in ways I could never fully track. I stepped farther into the center of the room and stumbled over something hard. At first, I thought it was a rock. I crouched down and reached for it. Then, I jerked my hand back. It was a human jawbone. I heard Sam say something behind me, something casual, something about a cool rock, but her voice sounded far away, like it was drifting to me from the end of a tunnel. I looked around and saw other bones near the first one, a femur, smaller bones, more shapes rising through the dust. As my eyes adjusted, I realized they formed a circle around me. I spun around to tell Sam we needed to leave. She was standing a few feet away, holding a strange black stone. It was curved and folded in a way that made it look like a flower just before blooming. The object seemed to drink in light. The shadows in the room bent toward it. The air moved strangely around her, as though she were standing at the center of some invisible storm. Then I heard voices. Not clear voices, not words at first, more like the memory of voices carried by the moving air, ancient, hoarse chanting that felt wrong in the human ear. Sam stepped over the circle of bones and approached a skull lying on the floor with its mouth wide open. She knelt and placed the black stone into the skull's open jaw. I asked her what she was doing. I still do not understand why she answered the way she did. Her voice did not sound like her own. It sounded distant and hollow, as if she were repeating words given to her. Then the stone opened. That is the only way I can describe it. The folded shape slowly spread apart, like a flower blooming. A deep blood-red light shone from its center. Sam screamed. Darkness swallowed everything. When I woke up, the first thing I smelled was rot and sulfur. The air was thick with it. When I opened my eyes, I honestly thought I had died. The sky above me was red. Not sunset red, not dawn red, a deep, vivid vermilion, streaked with dark clouds the color of soot. I scrambled to my feet and looked around in total disbelief. My respirator lay shattered on the ground beside me. I was standing in an open field, covered in sparse patches of white grass that looked as dry and brittle as bone. In the distance stood a forest of black trees. They were not beautiful or mysterious. They were simply wrong. Every line of them felt unnatural, as if the world itself had rejected them and failed. Something moved among those trunks. I immediately reached into my backpack and pulled out the only weapon I had, a kukri-style machete I used for clearing brush. It was meant for cutting small trees and thick plants, not for fighting monsters. But it was all I had. Whatever had moved in the forest was gone by the time I looked again, or else it had gone still. I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I did not want to go under those black branches. Opposite the forest, far on the horizon, I saw what looked at first like another shade of red in the sky. Then the clouds shifted, and I realized I was looking at a mountain. It was so huge that my mind struggled to understand it. Near it rose black spires connected by writhing lines of crimson light. I stood there with my machete in one hand and stared like an idiot. It felt ridiculous even then, standing in some red nightmare and thinking of old films. But the only words that came to me were the kind people say when the impossible becomes real. We are not in Kansas anymore. I started walking toward the black towers because there was nothing else to do. I checked my phone, but it was broken. My camera, thankfully, had survived in my bag. I took pictures as I walked. Part of me knew it was insane to care about evidence in a place like that. But another part clung to it desperately. If I ever made it home, I needed proof. It was the first time in my life I had ever doubted I would make it back from a trip. Above me, things flew across the red sky. Winged, serpent-like creatures with no heads, just circular mouths, filled with teeth, like lampreys. The white grass under my boots whispered when it snapped. And after a while, I realized the whispering was forming sounds. The dead grass was speaking. Then it began saying my name. I avoided stepping on it as much as I could. At one point, the clouds shifted enough for me to see the sun, or something where the sun should have been. A black, writhing mass surrounded it, as though some vast beast of darkness and tentacles were slowly swallowing it. I looked away so fast my neck hurt. The land changed as I moved forward. The white grass gave way to dark stones and black boulders carved with glowing symbols that brightened when I got close. Then I heard shouting. I ducked behind a rock. At first I only heard noise. Then I understood the sounds. A man was screaming, begging, crying for mercy. Soon, I saw the procession. The things leading him had the basic shape of men, but they were far too tall and too wrong. Their bodies were hunched, their arms long, their movement predatory. Black armor covered them from head to toe. Horns curved from their helmets. Bones hung from their armor and clattered as they walked. 6 of them passed, and behind them they dragged a man by a loop of metal driven through his forearms. He noticed me and screamed something in a language I did not know. Maybe he was asking for help. I did nothing. I hate myself for that. But it is true. I stayed hidden. I was too afraid. They marched toward the towers, and I followed at a distance, taking pictures and trying not to make a sound. The smell changed as we approached those towers. The sulfur remained, but now it mixed with the smell of rotting flesh. At one point, I tripped over a boot lying in the path, and when I looked up, I realized it was still attached to a body. People had been impaled along the road, dozens of them. They hung from pikes like some obscene row of streetlights. Bodies in every stage of decay, old men, young women, children, people in modern clothes, people in armor. A man dressed like a samurai, another in expensive sneakers that looked nearly new. One person even wore chain mail. That was when the full horror of the place began to sink in. These people were not all from one place or one time. Blood ran down carved grooves in the pikes and disappeared into the earth below. I kept moving, trying not to look too long, but curiosity kept dragging my eyes upward. Every face I saw made the world less real. When I got close enough to the towers, I saw more groups being herded in. Some captives fought, some wept, some had already given up and just stumbled forward. Crimson lightning arced from the towers into the distance at regular intervals. There were no walls, no proper defenses, no guards positioned the way human soldiers would guard a fortress. It was as if the beings there believed no one could threaten them. Maybe they were right. I climbed a slope of broken rock to get a better view of what lay between the towers. Below me, the captives were forced into a ring of enormous standing stones. More armored beings gathered around them. At first, I thought I was about to witness an execution. Then, something moved close by. I turned, expecting another one of those armored things. Instead, a creature the size of a large dog crept around the rock. I still struggle to describe it properly. Its body was low and stocky, covered in reptilian skin. It had 4 short legs, and each leg ended in something horribly close to a human hand. It had no proper head. Instead, there was a stump surrounded by a ring of eyes, and from the top of that stump writhed tentacles that moved like they were tasting the air. I grabbed a nearby stone and heaved it down on the thing before it could make a sound. The impact was wet and awful. Black blood splashed across the rocks. I looked back toward the armored beings below, but they had noticed nothing. They had started chanting. Their weapons struck shields and armor in a growing rhythm until the great towers began to hum and spin. Crimson light gathered in the largest spire, then shot into the ring of stones. The captives did not even have time to scream. The space inside the ring became a black void. Bones, pieces of flesh, scraps of clothing, all of it lifted and drifted in the air like ash or pollen. Then more of those black armored beings charged into the void and vanished. That was when I understood. This was not just some nightmare prison. It was a staging ground, a military base, a gate. They were breaking into other worlds through blood and death. I was not just trapped in hell. I was behind enemy lines. I hid among the rocks for a long time after that, shaking, trying to decide what to do. The body of the creature I had killed began dissolving into the ground. Black roots rose up around it, tightening, consuming it until nothing remained but disturbed earth. Even death was wrong in that place. Eventually, I realized my hiding place would not save me forever. The towers now seemed almost empty. Most of the armored creatures had gone through the portal. If I wanted any chance of escape, I needed to move. So I approached the nearest spire. Up close, it was enormous, like a skyscraper forged from black metal and bone. Its entrance was a huge open arch. Inside, red crystal-like growths in the walls gave off a sick light. From the ceiling hung cages and skeletal remains in different stages of decay. I kept taking pictures, partly to stay focused, partly because if I stopped and really let myself feel what I was seeing, I thought I might break. A ramp-like hallway spiraled upward along the inner wall. Every few yards there were indentations in the stone, like alcoves, just large enough for a person to squeeze into. Higher up, I found a room filled with a mechanical structure that looked something like an orrery, except it was too vast and too complex to represent one solar system. It looked more like hundreds. I started to suspect the portal below did not travel through time at all. It traveled between worlds. A balcony opened from that room. From there I saw movement near the portal below. At first I thought the black armored creatures had returned, but the figures emerging wore silver steel, not black. Human-shaped, armed like medieval knights. As they shouted to one another, other creatures shrieked from above. I ran back inside and pressed myself into one of those wall indentations. Soon the black armored creatures rushed past me in a clattering wave. When they were gone, I crept out and nearly collided with one that had been left behind. It jumped in shock, which almost would have been funny if I had not been so terrified. It was taller than me by at least 2 feet. It dropped the thing it was carrying and reached for an axe at its belt. I charged it before it could call for help. That part of the fight still feels blurry. It hit me hard enough to throw me across the floor, and only the wrist strap on my machete kept me from losing it entirely. The creature buried its axe in the floor on a missed swing, and while it struggled to pull the weapon free, I got to my feet and hacked at the side of its neck. It had less armor than the others. Maybe it was some kind of worker or operator. The blade bit deep. Black blood sprayed. The creature dropped to its knees, clutching at its throat. I kept swinging, again and again and again. My arms felt like they were breaking. Each blow shuddered up into my shoulders. It tried to block with one hand, and I cut through fingers, then hand, then deeper into the neck. It stopped moving before I stopped striking. I fell backward, exhausted. That was when I heard more footsteps. 3 men in steel armor came around the corner. One carried a huge sword, one a spear. They shouted in a language I did not know and pointed their weapons at me. Then the spearman looked at the corpse, looked at my bloody machete, and slowly lowered his weapon. He held out a hand and helped me up. He began speaking to me and using gestures. He pointed upward, made a pulling motion, then mimed sleep beside his hands. A way home, I thought. At least that was what I hoped. I nodded. He patted me on the shoulder, called to the others, and together we climbed higher into the tower. We met resistance, but not much. I was half dead from fear and exhaustion, and could barely keep pace, while they moved in heavy armor, as if they had trained their whole lives for this. We passed rooms filled with strange mechanisms, and others filled with blood and torn bodies. The higher we went, the more the air felt charged, like standing inside a thunderstorm. At the top of the tower, we emerged beneath the open red sky. In the center of that roof was a huge black cone-shaped mass, with a glowing object embedded near its top. Light from that object rose into some kind of suspended prism structure, which then fed the beams connecting the towers and the portal below. The swordsman shouted and pointed toward the glowing object. We ran. Then something grabbed one of the knights and pulled him down. I looked back and saw a creature climbing over the black cone. It was a hideous mass of mouths, claws, tentacles, and limbs that did not belong together. It shrieked through too many throats at once. The knight it grabbed screamed as it tore into him. The others turned to fight. I ran for the cone. When I reached it, I realized it was not metal or stone. It was bodies. Hundreds of bodies fused together and blackened like petrified flesh. Arms, faces, torsos, hands, all twisted into the mass. I climbed them anyway. I had no choice. As I neared the top, I saw who was holding the glowing object. Sam. She was half turned to black stone, fused into the mass up to her torso. She cradled the glowing thing against herself, like something precious. I knew what it was even before I fully saw it. The same black flower stone, the one she had placed in the skull. Sam, I said, reaching toward her. It's okay. I'm here. The moment I touched the object, her eyes opened. Red light poured from them. Her mouth opened too, but no voice came out. Only more of that same glowing light. Behind me I heard shouting and the sound of metal being crushed. I looked back just long enough to see the monstrous thing tear another knight apart. Only the swordsman was still alive, and he was bleeding badly. He shouted at me and pointed to the glowing object. So I grabbed it. It was warm, but not burning. It felt almost soft, human even. As I pulled it free, Sam's body arched backward and completed its change into black stone. She became part of the mound, like everyone else beneath me. I remember saying I was sorry, Then the world warped. Everything bent like water around me. The creature lunged. Darkness swallowed me again. I woke back in the basement of the military site. I was lying inside the circle of bones. In my hands was the same black stone, folded shut once more. Sam was gone. I threw the stone into a dark corner, stumbled to my feet, and fled. I wanted to run, but my body felt as if I had actually climbed that tower and fought for my life. I barely made it out of the woods. The next morning, I woke up half delirious, and for a few awful seconds, I did not know where I was. Then the memory crashed back into me in full. The walk out of the forest was both miserable and surreal. I kept replaying everything, trying to make it fit into some kind of logic. It would not fit. Nothing about it would. I still had the photos on my camera. I checked them. They were all there. Clear. Perfect. No corruption. No distortion. Proof, at least to me, that none of it had been a hallucination. That is why I tried to tell people. I went to authorities. Men in suits asked me questions and took my camera. They told me they would be in touch. I never heard from them again. I made copies beforehand, thank God, but I knew the moment they took the original that I was probably never getting it back. When I got home, something even worse started happening. The memories began slipping away. Not all at once. Slowly. Like water leaking through my fingers. I forced myself to remember. I looked at the copied pictures over and over, trying to burn them back into my mind. I would not let the place vanish from me. No matter how terrible it had been, forgetting it felt dangerous. Like that was somehow part of the trap. When I opened the door to my apartment, Sam's absence hit me harder than anything else. I sat down on my couch and stared at nothing. Then I noticed something on my coffee table. The black stone, folded shut, waiting. I had left it behind in that basement. I grabbed it, ran to the window, and threw it out into the street, as hard as I could. I watched it hit the pavement, bounce, and roll into the gutter below. For a moment I felt relief. Then I went to bed and lay there trying to hold on to the memories as they kept fraying at the edges. I wondered if that world had poisoned me, if something there had damaged my mind. Maybe the stone itself was causing it, forcing forgetfulness so that I would use it again without understanding what it was. I kept telling myself I would not forget the red sky. I rolled over in bed and felt something hard beneath my pillow. My stomach dropped. I slid my hand under it and touched something smooth, warm. Even before I pulled it out, I knew exactly what it was.